The Memphis Grizzlies fall hard in New York to the Knicks, looking listless, turnover-prone, unable to defend. What went wrong? How can it go right? And how can it get fixed as soon as possible? Because the Grizzlies have another game coming up within 24 hours against the Boston Celtics. We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome to this edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, flying solo. No DeMichael Cole on this edition of the show. Very excited to have you with me for the next 30 minutes or so talking Memphis Grizzlies basketball here on Locked On Grizzlies. Again, proud member of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and now the #1 sports podcast network out there. Thank you so much for helping make us that. We are appreciative. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Hang out with DeMichael and I each and every time an episode drops here on Locked On Grizzlies. Continue to make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption. I consumed Memphis Grizzlies content just like you probably did on Tuesday night. The Grizzlies falling to the New York Knicks in Madison Square Garden. Not the prettiest contest by any stretch of the imagination. Memphis falls 133-120. And the hardest thing for me, and I'm sure if you're an everydayer to the podcast, you know this to be true. The thing that I am most focused on each and every time I watch these Memphis Grizzlies play, from my co-host DeMichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Tennessee and Memphis, he prioritizes rebounding. And rebounding is almost always a concern, right? Especially with no Zach Edey. That is fair to point out, not disputing that. The Grizzlies had 44 rebounds in this game against the Knicks. The New York Knicks had 44 rebounds. So the rebounding edge was even. And if you go across a lot of other numbers, which I'm not going to do, box score reading is fairly boring, and I don't want to lose you, my dear listener, dear viewer. I want you to stay with me. But you can pull up a box score as you check out this episode of the show, unless you're driving. Be safe. But if you're not driving, by all means, go find a box score. And you will see that Memphis was roughly the same in terms of shooting percentage, in terms of assists, in lots of measurables. The Grizzlies and the Knicks were in the same realm except for one critical stat, the one that I care about more than any other when it comes to this Grizzlies team: turnovers and points that come off of the turnovers. The Memphis Grizzlies had 22 turnovers against the New York Knicks. The Knicks had 15. The Knicks gave up 11 points off of their turnovers. The Memphis Grizzlies gave up 33. That is the difference in the contest. And for me, that is the major difference in this season so far for the Memphis Grizzlies. When they protect possessions, when they are able to hold on to the basketball, they are a much more competitive team. When they have these turnovers and the opposing team, especially one as talented as the New York Knicks, is able to go out and transition, not allow for a defense to get set for Memphis, they are going to abuse the Grizzlies. And when that occurs, they are not able to hang tough. The Grizzlies' offense was not the issue in this game. When the Grizzlies were able to hold on to the possessions, they shot 37% from beyond the arc. They shot 51% overall from the field. The Grizzlies shot 83.3% from the charity stripe. They had an offensively effective evening. It was the turnovers that doomed them and the lack of transition defense in the wake of those turnovers. That is what the problem remains for, or what the problem remains and continues to be for the Memphis Grizzlies. The New York Knicks, it is important to point out, are an NBA Finals contender. The Memphis Grizzlies are not an NBA Finals contender as currently constructed. At 4-8, 12 games into the season, the Grizzlies are a bad basketball team. That's the reality. Could that change? Yeah, maybe that could change. We'll talk more about some ideas on how that could change later on in the show. But right now, 12 games into the campaign with 70 to go, still plenty of basketball to be played. The Grizzlies are a bad basketball team. And why is the question? Why are they a bad basketball team? Where do you start? I think it's important to acknowledge that it's not such an easy answer as to say it's Ja Morant's fault, or it's Tomas Isolo's fault, or it's Jaren Jackson Jr.'s fault, or Zach Kleiman's fault. If that were that simple, an easy fix could occur, especially if you truly believe that the coach or the GM were the problem, right? It's much easier to fire a coach. It's much easier to fire a GM than it is to trade a player. If Isolo was the clear problem, cut out the problem. If Zach Kleiman's inability to build a roster was the clear issue, then you cut out the problem and you try to address it as quickly as possible. But when it comes to on-court production, it's fair to point out that the guys that were most guilty of the turnovers that I was just complaining about were Ja Morant and Jaren Jackson Jr. Ja Morant, who looked very uninterested in playing defense, a sizable chunk of the game, also committed 8 turnovers. 8 turnovers. Ja had 10 assists, but 8 turnovers. That is a remarkably poor number. And I would argue it's more important than his 4 for 14 shooting. The slump continues. At some point, it's fair to get concerned about whether or not it's a slump. I'm not there yet. But something has changed in the relationship, coaching-wise, the effort on the court, especially on the defensive end. Ja is not playing the way that we have seen him play in the past. It is fair to say that, especially on the defensive end. The 8 turnovers is abysmal from your lead guard. That can't happen if you hope to be a competitive basketball team. But it's also fair to say that Jaren Jackson Jr.'s 5 turnovers aren't great either. And Jaren's inability and his isolation opportunities to pass out of them when he's getting double teamed, I sound like a broken record on Locked On Grizzlies. Time and again, we talk about how Jaren has to pass out of those looks. If he is not capable of doing that, he is extremely easy to guard in terms of double team situations. You time his release, you time his cut, you time his pivot. I'm not a basketball savant. I've just watched enough of it in my life to know, especially of Jaren Jackson Jr. in this particular instance, when he's going to do what he's going to do. And I am not paid thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars to either institute a scheme to get that done or execute that scheme. So if I know it, I promise you the New York Knicks and the other 28 teams in the NBA beyond Memphis and New York know it as well. That's on Jaren and that's on Ja. But I also think it's fair to point out that those two guys don't play a ton of basketball together. And I think it's fair to point out the choices of guys that are getting opportunity in this scheme. You continue to start Jock Landale, and Jock Landale, blaming him for this is foolish. But are your best players on the floor? Santi Aldama was the best player for the Grizzlies in this game. 19 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. But he's not starting the game. Cedric Howard, 11 points, 5 assists, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 4 stocks, led the team in stocks. Not his best shooting performance, 0 for 5 from 3. But you could pretty easily argue he was your best defender in the game. But he's coming off the bench. The Grizzlies lose the first quarter, 42-30. They lose the second quarter, 35-24. The game is over at halftime. And you can't say, yay, great job getting back in the game in the second half. This isn't peewee basketball. This isn't even high school basketball. They have to be competitive from the jump. And yet this same starting lineup keeps getting trotted out. Why? In the name of micro bursts and trying to find rotations that allow for these guys to maximize their pace. The team is not capable of playing with pace right now. So as a coach, when do you acknowledge that it's not working? When do you see that Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and or Jock Landale ain't it? And if you want to argue about Jalen Wells as well, I am not as far gone on Wells. He had 18 points, was one of your more effective shooters in this contest, and we know he can defend. So Wells wasn't the problem. But KCP and then Landale, they are not 2 of your best players right now. You have Santi Aldama and Cedric Howard right there. So why are you starting so far behind in terms of the talent that you're able to put out on the court? That's coaching. That's coaching. How does this get addressed? How do you fix it if you are the Memphis Grizzlies? How can it be fixed if it's possible to be fixed at all? That's what we're going to talk about coming back next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Stay with us. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA is back, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you miss the start of a game and you run, or maybe you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Hopefully you didn't bet on that with the Grizzlies against the Knicks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps getting every game keeps getting more and more exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Head to FanDuel.com right now, sign up, and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by BILT. Nobody likes to pay rent, right? But if you have to, you might as well get something for it. That's where BILT comes in. BILT is changing the game by turning your rent payment into real rewards that you can actually use. When you pay rent through BILT, you can earn flexible points that can be redeemed toward hundreds of hotels and airlines, a future rent payment, your next Lyft ride, and more. But BILT is not just about rent. It is about rewarding you around your entire neighborhood. BILT allows your rent to work for you. You are earning points every month on something that you already have to pay. And whether you're grabbing food at your local favorite local restaurant or heading to the gym, you can still earn rewards. BILT makes everyday life feel more rewarding, from your neighborhood to travel plans. Turn your rent into rewards now and start earning points around the neighborhood by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnba. That's joinbilt.com/lockedonnba. Make sure to use that link so they know that we sent you. So enough complaining, right? Just pointing at something that's broken and saying it's broken. Anybody can do that. Let's try to solve these issues. And at the end of the previous part of the show, the first obvious change to me is changing the starting lineup. And no, I am well aware that the minutes matter more than who starts. And Cedric Coward already gets starters minutes. And Santi Aldama already gets starters minutes. I get it. But the Grizzlies have struggled mightily with starting basketball games this season. It is a problem for them. They are starting slow. They are counting on a Cedric Coward or a Santi Aldama to come off the bench and provide energy. And when that is your case, why not begin the game with your best players on the court if you're able to do so? You can't say in the name of the system, because Jock Landale is a better screener as a big than Jaren Jackson Jr., that is why you're making that choice. Newsflash, it isn't helping Ja Morant at the moment. It's not. There is no advantage to having Landale out there beyond his hit or miss rebounding. And it is fair to say hit or miss. Against the Knicks, he was able to grab 8 boards, led the team in that space. But you know who grabbed 7? Santi Aldama. You know who grabbed 6? Jaren Jackson Jr. So one of the arguments is this massive gap in the rebounding strength. Wasn't there against New York. And the offensive benefit would outweigh whatever potential glass issue there is. And if you're really concerned about that, and that's something that you want to prioritize, making sure is a strong focal point of the lineup with Landale out, which is a wild sentence to say. Here comes Cedric Coward, who is one of the better rebounding wings in the NBA, regardless of rookie status. Coward was quiet, 3 rebounds against the Knicks, but he was also asked to be more of an offensive facilitator. He had 2 steals, 2 blocks. He put a bunch of numbers up for the Grizzlies. Coward can rebound. He can help in that process too. So if you don't want to do both, the most obvious choice for switching, and we've talked about this before on the show, is Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. And to Isolo's credit, KCP only played 15 minutes against the Knicks. It's like he saw that it wasn't working for KCP in this particular contest. Let Cedric Coward cook. Or, I wish DeMichael was here because we could rejoice in the sentence I'm about to say. If you want to keep Cedric Coward in that 6th man role and his energy off the bench, you know who's had a good string of the last couple of games? Vince Williams Jr. 14 points, 3 made threes, 9 rebounds for Vince Williams Jr., 6 assists, 5 turnovers. Not the best. That's a fair thing to say. Maybe you don't want to start Vince Williams Jr. because of the turnover issue. He didn't do it as he struggled with it just like Ja did. Ja, of course, is the actual point guard, and Vince Williams Jr. is not, but I digress. There are options, is the point. Even if you don't want to play a G.G. Jackson, even if you don't want to give him that opportunity for whatever reason, you have Vince Williams Jr. I would start Cedric Howard. That's what I would do. If you like Jock Landale because of the screening philosophy, fine. But I think that's an easy switch. I would start both Aldama and Coward. The next thing that you can do going into the next game with the Celtics, in a positive note, that game is literally within the next 24 hours. A positive there, in terms of a change that is tangible, is you can tell the team to ease up on the pace. And I understand that speed kills. That's what we've heard all through the preseason, right? DeMichael Cole, my wonderful co-host, going and watching training camp practices, talking about speed kills. You know what it's killing? The Grizzlies' offensive opportunities. You know what else it's killing? The Grizzlies' defensive rotations. I would argue the turnovers are a bigger problem defensively than offensively, because the Grizzlies are a sieve on that end of the court right now. One of the worst defenses in the entire NBA. And they have Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and they have Jalen Wells. They have guys, Cedric Howard, that were supposed to improve the defense. When you think defensive acumen, you don't think Ty Jerome. You don't think Zach Edey. Edey helps, but he's not this massive stopper. He's a massive paint presence. But you are not missing much except for Scottie Pippen Jr. defensively. If you want to argue for Brandon Clark, I would argue you haven't really had Brandon Clark in some time. But sure, Clark is a decent defender too. But it's not this bad. The Grizzlies can't stop a cold from passing around a daycare right now. Look at the numbers that some of these Knicks players had. 11 of 19 for Jalen Brunson, 5 of 7 for Jordan Clarkson. That's a problem. The Knicks were making 22 threes, 22 out of 55. The Knicks shot 40% from beyond the arc on 55 attempts. Your three-point defense is not there. It's not there. And part of that is getting lost in transition. Part of that is not being able to get back and have a set defense. And that happens when you have turnovers. It's not like the Knicks had this ungodly amount of fast break points. That's an important distinction to make, because when you think turnovers, you think transition defense, you think that fast break is where the Grizzlies got killed. That is not what happened. The Knicks only had 16 fast break points against the Grizzlies. It's the fact that the Grizzlies are not able to get back and get set. The Knicks can go into a scramble situation or put the Grizzlies in a scramble situation where maybe they miss a rotation. They don't have complete and total understanding of where they're supposed to be on the court. It allows for open threes. And it allows for people like Jalen Brunson to go off, which is exactly what he did, to the tune of 32 points and 10 assists on 19 shots. Once upon a time, we were having conversations about Ja Morant being better than Jalen Brunson. Those conversations ain't happening anymore, folks. At least not for me. Jalen Brunson is decisively better than Ja Morant at this stage. And that's the third thing that, in theory, you can fix. There has to be some sort of conversation with Ja Morant. You have to reach out to this guy and say, this is not it. This is not the guy that has signature shoes. This is not the guy that talks trash about going up a chimney and we're not afraid of the smoke and all those sorts of things. Maybe that guy's gone. Maybe he is. And that's something that DeMichael and I can talk about later on this week together. Maybe we are longing for a player that no longer exists. But you got to try to find that spark. And that comes from coaching. It's on a coach to have to try to go and motivate a player. And you can be mad about that and say, he's a grown man. he's making millions of dollars playing a kid's game. I get it, dude. I'm with you. But that's not how life works. And that's not how athletics work. A coach has to be a motivator. Clearly, Ja Morant is not motivated right now. This Ja Morant is not helping the Memphis Grizzlies win. Helping to have some sort of spark, some sort of come to realization conversation, getting Ja back engaged. It's on Tuomas Isalo to figure out how to do that. And it's on Ja Morant to be a professional basketball player and go out there and do his best to execute. Both bear blame for that. How would you fix it? Starting lineup, prioritizing possessions, communicating defensively, getting your star point guard going with some motivational speeches. I don't know. All I know is the current state of play is not working. Hit me up on X. Let me know in the comments at Joe Mullinax. What would you do? When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we're going to close out this edition of the show. Thankfully, we got another basketball game to cover, right? Another game to discuss. The Boston Celtics hosting the Memphis Grizzlies. Second night of a back-to-back for both squads. What's it going to look like? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Mint Mobile. If you're still overpaying for wireless, it's time to say yes to saying no. At Mint Mobile, their favorite word is no. No contracts, no monthly bills, no overages, no hidden fees, no BS. I said yes. So should you to making the switch and getting premium wireless for just $15 a month. Mint makes it simple. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talk and text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can even bring your own phone and keep your same number and contacts. The setup is super easy. Again, you get to keep your number, and then you get to run and make the most of the Mint Mobile difference within minutes. Are you ready to say yes to saying no? Make the switch at mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnba. Upfront payment of $45 required, equivalent to $15 a month. Limited time new customer offer for first 3 months only. Speeds may slow above 35 gigabytes on unlimited plan. Taxes and fees extra. See Mint Mobile for details. So again, a positive of life in the NBA, a literal new game to play on Wednesday evening against the Boston Celtics. And a positive for Memphis is in a blowout, the Grizzlies saw some guys like Ja Morant play 34 minutes. Jaren Jackson Jr. played 30 minutes. So did Santi Aldama. So did Cedric Coward. Not an unbelievable amount of time being spent on the court, right? The Boston Celtics played a pretty competitive game against the Philadelphia 76ers, and Boston lost this contest, 102-100. Boston was in Philly. They have to travel just like the Grizzlies are having to travel into the city of Boston. Not the longest commute, right? Boston to Philly, New York to Boston, or Philly to Boston, and then New York to Boston, excuse me. It's not like Memphis has a major disadvantage compared to what the Celtics had to do. That is a positive. The Celtics are not going to be fresh. The Grizzlies are also not going to be fresh. Both teams are struggling right now. Again, Boston losing record. The Grizzlies have a losing record. This is not the Boston Celtics of a year or two ago when you were thinking they were a championship contender. Obviously, the main reason for that being Jason Tatum and his injury. The Celtics trade away Kristaps Porzingis. They make these moves to try to shore up their financial situation going into a season that is essentially lost for them. Derek White still exists, right? And I don't know if you know this about Derek White, but he can shoot the three-point ball. Jaylen Brown still exists, and Jaylen Brown is a superstar caliber player. Peyton Pritchard, who is not doing his best work at the moment, still has his own shooting stroke that is impressive. Anthony Simons is a microwave scorer off the bench for them. This is not going to be a game that the Grizzlies can just chalk up as a victory because the Boston Celtics are phoning it in. Boston is not a phone-it-in squad. Joe Mazzulla, their head coach, is not that kind of mentality. The Celtics are going to give you their very best every single time you see them. How can the Grizzlies win this game? They have to get Ja Morant going. Derek White will likely take that assignment. He's a good defender, but Ja, when invested, Ja, when moving, Ja, when Ja could win that battle in terms of those priorities, getting screens early on in sets, getting Ja something confidence building has to be a major focal point. And maybe you allow for a Jaren Jackson Jr. to be an initiator of offense and force him to be that passer. Maybe you allow for a Jalen Wells or somebody else, hopefully not Kentavious Caldwell-Pope in the starting lineup, but a Cedric Coward, a Cam Spencer. I can't believe I'm arguing for that. But you have to find different ways to get Ja looks, both where he's comfortable and attacking the basket. If you're not able to do that, the rest of this is moot. That remains true, dear listener, dear viewer. If you're an everyday to the podcast, an everydayer, if Ja Morant isn't going to be a focal point of the offense, if Ja Morant is not going to be the best player on the floor for the Memphis Grizzlies, they're going to be a bad basketball team. And it's very possible that the Grizzlies are a bad basketball team. Their record says they're a bad basketball team. But Memphis has an opportunity here against a Boston team that is not rested, a Boston team that has injury issues just like the Grizzlies do, arguably worse injury issues. That this is a chance for them to get right. This is a chance for them to attack the paint. The Celtics don't have this elite big man that is going to come in and make life miserable for the Grizzlies. Hugo Gonzalez and Luka Garza and Nemias Queta, and I'm sure I mispronounced that, Queta, they are not dominant forces. These are guys that can be taken advantage of. But if you go out there with Jock Landale and you don't put mismatches out on the court, you have no one to blame but yourself. There's going to be plenty of opportunities for Memphis to go and find mismatches against this version of the Boston Celtics. But if they don't take it upon themselves to seek those mismatches, whether it's in rotation minute matchups, whether it is on the court in particular sets offensively, it's going to be a really long night for the Grizzlies. That is a problem. And one of the reasons that Philly was able to hold on to the win, it's not like Philly was at full strength. No Paul George. Joel Embiid doesn't play in this game. Andre Drummond turned back the clock and posted a double-double. Tyrese Maxey didn't have his best game. One of the reasons that Philly was able to knock off Boston, even in this weaker form of who they were, Edgecombe had a rough night for the rookie, they protected the ball. Only 9 turnovers. They were able to protect possessions against this Boston Celtics team. If the Grizzlies can protect possessions, they are going to have additional opportunities to score. It's going to give them more chances to actually play front court or half court defense as opposed to transition defense. The Celtics are not a team that are going to get out and run consistently and try to kill you in transition in terms of fast break points, but they're similar to the Knicks. They are a very good offensive team in terms of execution. You don't get to the levels that Boston has gotten at the last couple of years by sheer talent alone. They're coached well. They execute their schemes. They understand what their goals are. If you are unable to get into defensive sets, they're going to take advantage of you. The Grizzlies have to make sure that they're communicating and they're giving each other an opportunity to be in a good footing in transition defense. Getting back, competing, communicating, that has to be a focus too. Protecting the basketball, figuring out rotations, playing Jaren and Ja together more, and making sure that there is never a time where both of them are off at the same time. And starting faster through that Cedric Coward and Santi Aldama adjustment. At the very least, Cedric Coward for Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. These are ways that the Grizzlies can compete with Boston. Will Memphis win? Your guess is as good as mine, Grizzlies fans. This version of the Grizzlies is extremely hard to read. Every night, we are seeing something different in terms of effort, in terms of how they're executing, especially on the defensive end. If they can find their footing in transition defense, they've got a shot. If not, the Celtics are going to knock them off, and this terrible start to the season is just going to get worse. Thank you so much for being with me on this edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and thanks for making us your first listen every day. For your second listen, go find Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Josh Lloyd hosts the #1 fantasy basketball podcast, giving you daily tips and helping you win your league, all while making you a smarter NBA fan. Find Locked On Fantasy Basketball on YouTube, or wherever you listen to podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 podcast network in all the sports, your team every day. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, YouTube. Hang out with myself and DeMichael each and every time an episode drops. Help us continue to build up our lovely little corner of the internet that we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. Thanks so much for being with me on this edition of the show. I'll be back tomorrow talking Grizzlies Celtics. Maybe they'll take some advice, talk about starting lineups. We'll even talk about a little bit the Sacramento Kings are maybe interested in blowing things up. The Dallas Mavericks now, after firing Nico Harrison, maybe they're in flux. Are the Grizzlies getting closer to being in a similar spot, whether it's replacing front office personnel to a Masisalo experiment ending early? Maybe you do discuss trades for people like Ja Morant. How close are we to that nuclear option? We'll talk about that as well on our next edition of the show. Thank you for being with me on this episode. Until next time, stay locked in, stay safe out there, and we'll catch you around the bend here on Locked On Grizzlies. See you.